All the mortises and the maple planks are cut now. Now it's time to cut the tenons on the vertical walnut pillars. Now these are 3-inch thick planks, so the tenons have to be 3-inch long, which that's a very long tenon. I'm using my tenoning jig with the table saw. I've got a blade on here that has a fairly large distance between teeth, because I'm going to take a big bite in this wood and I don't want the blade filling up with chips. I'm going to be taking off about an 1/8 inch off of each side to be the cheeks of the tenons, and I'm going to do this in one pass so that I have a very even cut right up the side. You notice I've got the piece clamped in 2 directions onto my jig with the normal installed clamp plus a bar clamp to the back, so this piece won't go anywhere. Now you can see we've cut that one cheek. We'll flip the wood around, cut the other, and then we'll reset the saw for doing the 90-degree cheeks so we finish up the tenon. In order to cut the rearmost tenons in this wide piece of walnut, which are oriented at 90 degrees to the frontmost tenons, thereby requiring a cut that is farther in towards the center of the board, I had to make a special setup here because I could not go all the way through the wood with my saw blade, or I would have cut off the ears of the forward tenons. So I've installed a stop block to stop my piece, my movement, at the right point inside the wood, so that later on, when I come and cut the other cheeks, I'll have a cut that goes deep enough into the wood to complete this cheek. Now I've got to cut the opposite cheeks. These pieces are much too wide to fit into my tenoning jig, so I've used my miter fence, attaching a block to the fence with 2 screws and clamping the work to the block so it's very stable, and then I can run that on through the saw that way and have good control. Now the cheeks are cut, and it's time to make nice even shoulders so that the depth of the tenon is just slightly more than the depth of the mortise. I want the tenon to go all the way through the mortise and protrude just slightly proud, and I can later on just plane that excess off. So I've set up a crosscut sled that I made with the blade protruding just enough to shave off the amount of waste on the shoulder, and I've set up a stock block that I can slide my work up against and get the exact same dimensions on all the pieces of walnut. in order to get this big block of waste out, I'm going to use the bandsaw. Come in with a curve cut like that, another curve cut the opposite way, and later on I'll clean up the bottom with chisels. Now there's just a very small amount of cleanup work to do with chisels. Lest you think that all my work is done with machines, that's not the case. Right now I'm using a bench chisel to bring down some of the high spots on these tenons, places where I couldn't get at with the saw. For example, in between these two tenons, cleaning up the bottom of this particular tenon a little bit where I couldn't get the full depth of my cheek cuts. And so we'll just go ahead and take care of business the old-fashioned way. I'm going to use my router table to help round off some of the tenons. What I've done is I've installed a 1/4 inch radius roundover bit into my router, which is below the table, and a fence with a guard block, a stop block so I don't go too deep with my cut. I've already made a couple of cuts, and you know I've got to going to have to do the last little bit with a chisel, but I don't want to round over the show part here. And I can do some of the edges this way. I can't do them all, but I can do some of them. That'll save me a little bit of time in the whole process. Joinery is roughed out, and we have rounded over the tenons, but we can only get down close to the shoulder, so I got to get the rest of this by hand. I've got a pull saw here. It's a Japanese style teeth pull saw, but this particular saw is designed where the set on this side is 0. In other words, the teeth are not bent one way or the other. But they are bent out in this direction. The idea being that you can saw flush. It's called a flush cut saw. You can saw flush to surfaces without scratching the surface. So the first thing I'm going to do is round off the base of these tenons with the pull saw. And then I take the chisel, and you can see that I simply do some vertical paring to clean that up. Now the next step is to really shape these rounded edges. The router bit I used, you know, they don't fit perfectly. You don't get the perfect height and so forth. The idea is to get off most of the waste, then you come back, in my case with a file, and simply round off these edges, you know, where it's a little bit sharp. Try to make the curve about what I think it's going to be in the final fit. Now to all four sides, I've gone ahead and made a little template of the mortises that I can then use here and check my fit while the piece is in the vise. That pretty much assures that when I bring the piece over to the actual maple planks that the tenons will fit, or at least they'll be very close, and maybe just a little more work to get them perfect. It took a lot of handwork to get this pillar so that it fit properly, because we're talking about 2 tenons on the same piece going through 3-inch thick maple, but with a lot of filing and some work with chisels to get rid of rough edges and make sure that the 2 plunge cuts that I made to make mortises met up exactly. I was able to get this to fit in. Now, the fit's not going to ever be perfect on something this large, so what I will be doing is cutting slots in the tenons to wedge them, and that will allow the thin flaps of tenon to butt up very nicely against the insides of the mortise for a very tight fit. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and fit all the rest of the mortise and tenons as well as I can make them. I've done a dry fit of all the pillars in the mantle maple planks, and now you can get a much better idea what this piece is going to finally look like. Now, I have not yet cut slots in the tenons for wedges. I wanted to make sure that these tenons would fit the mortises correctly before I cut the slots. Now when I do cut the slots, I'm assured that in fact everything still will fit together. It's a whole lot easier to trim and adjust tenons before you cut slots, and then once you cut the slots, the wood becomes a little bit springy. Now, between these pillars will be the curved laminates that we made up, and then between these pillars will be a flat plank from the maple tree. But this is pretty much starting to come together, and you can get a good idea what this mantle is going to look like when it's all done. To finish up the tenons, I need to cut the slots for the wedges. Now I'm going to have a total of 4 wedges in each tenon. There will be a slot here, a slot here, a slot here, and a slot here. So we can expand the tenon out in all directions to firmly grip the mortise. These tenons are going to be very deep. They're going to, the slots are going to be very deep. They're going to come down to about 3/4 of an inch from the shoulder. Now there is some danger of the tenon splitting, so to relieve the point stress at the bottom of the slot, the saw kerf, I'll be drilling a 3/16 inch hole, and I've done a little mock-up here from a piece of cherry. I didn't have a piece of walnut just the same size, but I did have cherry, and I think that will tell me what I need to know. I went out and drilled a 3/16 inch hole all the way through, and then using the bandsaw, I cut my kerf, and then just for an experiment, take a screwdriver, make believe it's a wedge, and you see I can do quite a bit of flexure on this without splitting. So I'm sure that this setup will work just fine for the wedges for these particular tenons. The final step in making the tenons is to cut the slots for the wedges, and I'll do as many of them on the bandsaw as I can. I've set my fence to the right distance here, and we'll just go ahead and cut these out. case you were wondering how I was going to get to these last couple of cuts with the bandsaw, I wasn't.